This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, website, or online store, make your next move with Squarespace.
Does street photography have to have people in it? I think if you ask a lot of photographers, they'd argue yes, because street photography traditionally, I think, has had quite a narrow definition. In the minds of many, it's got to show people doing recognizable things in public. It's straight reportage. But I have a much wider definition for street photography for myself, and I consider it to be any candid image taken on the street. And yes, that of course includes that traditional style of street photography where we're focusing on people and what they're doing. But it can also include textures or colors or graphics or light and shadow or empty spaces or the little tiny details that are ignored by passers-by. And that's what I want to focus on in this video, those everyday mundane objects or artifacts which can take on special significance if we capture them in the right light and the right way. Taking a step back for a second, there's a long, rich tradition of still life in photography. From Adolphe Brown kicking things off in the 1800s photographing flowers, to Edward Weston photographing bell peppers to reveal the beauty of the undulating shapes under great lighting, to Joel Meyerowitz taking a break from more traditional street photography in his later years and turning his camera to capture inanimate objects on simple backgrounds which he found near his home in rural Tuscany. Photographers like these and many others have sought to reveal the beauty in everyday objects we might be missing or taking for granted. So why not street photographers? I like to think that we get to do the same thing. We can go out there and show the beauty in those little overlooked inanimate objects that we can find on the street when we're out with our cameras. I suppose you could almost think about it like street still life. I think we have the opportunity to tell some really interesting stories in photographing the things that people leave behind. In fact, I believe that if we focus on the remains and remnants of human presence in urban spaces, there are some fascinating, compelling images to be made. Even if no human beings appear directly in our frame, I think the objects themselves can speak to hints of human life in our cities. And they can tell us about the things which matter to us, and maybe also the things which don't. Let me show you some examples of these sorts of images so I can explain what I'm talking about. So to give you some examples, I'll show you some of my images, but then also my friend Joshua K. Jackson, who's also an incredibly talented street photographer, has also sent me over some example images to show you this style of photography, but in his particular flavor as well. So you can see how different photographers approach this stuff. And also to say that Joshua and I are working on a really exciting project together that I can't wait to share with you. It's a little way off release at the moment, but follow both our social medias and I'm sure you'll hear us talk about it soon. So this is a really simple example of the sort of image I'm talking about. This was an image I took in Soho a few years ago, and it was outside Lena stores, I believe, and they had this kind of beautiful vertical striped siding, and it's kind of degrading as well, which gives us a nice texture. And this perfect little shaft of sunlight had come through the awnings above onto these flowers on the table. Now they just cleared off the table, but I thought there was something beautiful about anticipation, maybe, that who's going to sit at this table, that maybe a conversation will be had here. It's aesthetically pleasing on its own, but it gives you this question of who put those flowers there? What are they going to set up this table for? What's going to happen at this table next? This is a shot of Josh's that I love, this deck chair that's been thrown into a lake and is just floating there amongst the algae. Because even though there are no people in this shot, there's a story somewhere, because I have to ask myself the question, how did that chair get there? Did someone get drunk and throw it in? Or did kids just throw it in because they thought it would be funny? It tells me about a day when it was hot enough and bright enough outside that people were out in deck chairs in the park. But then there are stories about what happened to make this chair be where it actually is in this lake. And I think images like this, even though there's no one in the shot, there's so much narrative to this picture. This was an image I took in Soho during the pandemic when we were allowed to come out of our houses and start walking around again. And I noticed that they had this abandon all plans mosaic on the floor. It's been there for ages, but now with the inclusion of what was happening with the pandemic and the fact that there was this newspaper which had been pushed through the letterbox of the door and was sitting there saying virus claims Soho's Shah, it sort of talks about a place and a time. So even though there's no one in the frame, you can kind of see my reflection there. But this abandon all plans because of what's happened takes on significance. I don't need people in this shot to tell this little story. This is one of Josh's images that I absolutely love. I found it so compelling. Obviously, it's an old, distressed phone box. It's worse for wear. It's dirty. There's graffiti everywhere. It's being lit by a red light, maybe from a brake light or a traffic light, or maybe there's red lighting on the street that kind of fills this space with that red light. And that "your cocaine is killing me" on the side speaks to the desperation of addiction and the dark side of our cities and how people that we walk past every day might really be struggling. And for me, I think this is more powerful than actually taking a photograph of somebody who was literally struggling with addiction on the street. I personally have some issues with photographing people who are in a difficult situation in their life. It feels unethical in some circumstances, but this shot, without anyone in it, makes that point so strongly. This was an image I took on South Bank years ago, and what I love about this is that this is a cart that was left behind. Obviously, one of the guys who picks up the garbage off the street in the area and keeps the streets clean. But if you look at the little details on the actual garbage cart that he has here, there's lots of little things that he's stuck on. He's personalized it. There are, photos of this couple kissing. There's a little cupcake guy. And what I assume is a photograph of one of his children. He's made this cart his own. And there's a nice order to it. The way things are tied on and left really organized so that he can obviously do his job efficiently. I thought this cart, in so many little ways, tells you the story about who it belongs to. This is a shot of Josh's, and obviously we're very familiar with seeing this kind of thing. Maybe you could photograph something terrible happening in the moment, but you can also photograph the aftermath of it. Because to me, something terrible obviously happened here. If we read the sign, we can see that somebody passed away, and this is out on the street, right? But the fact that you've got so many flowers tied to this lamppost doesn't just speak to the fact that something bad happened. It speaks to how much this person was deeply loved, and how those who they left behind really want to make a huge effort to remember them and celebrate their life. And there's something so evocative about this, maybe that you couldn't capture in any other way. If you photographed a bad thing happening on the street because you happened to be there, I don't think it would speak as much and as powerfully as this does about how we hold on to those that we love even after they're gone. So what are we looking for when we make images like this? Well, I think overall, it's looking for those little details that speak to something much bigger about our lives. Those little objects that tell us stories about how we live. A discarded toy might tell us the story about a child who lost their favorite teddy bear on a day out, or maybe on a bigger level about how we lose our childhoods as we grow older. An umbrella that's discarded and bent inside out might speak to us about somebody trying to get home the night before and being caught in a storm and having to throw the umbrella away because it was bent inwards by the wind. An empty table and a slash of light in a closed restaurant might speak to us about how we like to get together around tables and what group of friends might sit there later and what conversations they may have. And they might even remind us about our own groups of friends and the people we care about. This is less literal photography because maybe you go out on a day to take some street photography and not much seems to be happening. You can't take those photographs of those more obvious human stories happening in front of your camera because sometimes they're just not there. But what if we then turn our cameras to find those little details that speak to hints of human life and that ask us to make up our own stories or apply our own lived story to the image that we're seeing and to think more about what it means to be human in a city space? Personally, I find this sort of imagery really evocative. So perhaps next time you're out there on the streets and you can't seem to get a good photograph because, and I've heard lots of street photographers say this, just not much seemed to be happening. Maybe on that day it's time to start paying attention to the details. Look down, look around you. What have people left behind in the wake of their lives? And is there a way that you can take a photograph of that object that they've left to tell us a really rich story, even if the owner of that object doesn't appear in the frame? And if you do find one of those objects, don't just snap a shot of it and keep moving. Spend some time with it and make a great image of it, because all the rules of photography still apply. We still want good light, great textures, interesting colors, a background that doesn't distract, and a well-framed image, because all those elements coming together with the skills we have as a photographer are what's going to take that object from something that's mundane that people are walking past to something we think people should spend some time with and pay attention to. It's our way of taking the ordinary and making it beautiful. And just a note before we start to wrap this up, have some integrity with how you make these images. I have a pretty broad definition of street photography, but I still think a really key ingredient to that definition is that the images we make on the street have to be properly candid. Hopefully, as a street photographer, you wouldn't pre-arrange people in a scene and then make an image and suggest to us as your viewers that that was an image made candidly. And we need to have the same integrity when it comes to this sort of photography with objects. Avoid the temptation of staging anything, because for those of us who view your image, it's really important to know that you stumbled across that scene as it is. It adds an authenticity to it, which for us makes it far more of a compelling story. For me, it's one of the signs of a great photographer. If they can be looking around and they can see the thing that everyone else is missing or walking past or ignoring, but they can make an image of it and reveal its beauty. Tuning yourself in to recognize those things that everyone else is just walking past, but you're noticing the potential either to make an image that's aesthetically pleasing or to make an image that has a narrative, that has something interesting about it that the rest of us can see. If you push yourself to do that and notice the world like that, I think it's a fantastic way to develop yourself as a photographer. So my challenge to you is this: the next time you're out on the street with your camera, of course, make those more traditional style street photography reportage images of photographing people doing interesting things in urban spaces. They're great images to make. But also push yourself to look down and look around and notice what people are leaving behind, and find ways to make images of those objects that tell those quieter, more evocative, more interesting stories, the ones that we make up for ourselves as we imagine what human being might have left that behind and what they might have been doing in the process. I also happen to think that photographing this way can make us a better human being as well, because as we walk around and we're paying attention to the smaller things, the overlooked things, the things that are less obvious, it makes us more awake and aware and forces us to be really present in order to get those sorts of shots. And it might just help us to appreciate the little things in life too. Best of luck. And just before I go, I wanted to say that I now have 5 editions of my Parable magazine available. Each one features writing and photography around a theme, and I couldn't be more proud of these. I really think it's been a step forward from the collections that I used to do, which didn't really have much of a theme to them, and actually growing up as a photographer and properly writing and sequencing images around a given theme. You can either grab copies like this in a physical format on this beautiful uncoated paper, or you could get a digital version, which is a PDF and an MP3 file of me reading the magazine to you. I'll leave a link down in the description if you'd like to go and pick up a copy for yourself. And just to say thank you so much to all of you who already have purchased copies of Parable. Thank you so much for your feedback. It's been so nice to hear your responses to this work. And also it goes a long way to supporting the videos I make here on this channel. And then lastly, thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this episode. If you need a new website or a domain, they're a fantastic option. I've used them myself as my website of choice for over a decade now. The reason I initially decided to go with Squarespace was because I don't have any experience in coding or website design or how to put a website together in general. But I wanted a nice, clean, a minimalist website where I could feature my photography, show some videos, have an about page and a contact form, and even a store where I could sell my work. Initially, I was so intimidated about how I would put that website together. But after I did a little bit of research and tried out Squarespace, I found it so easy to be able to just drag in text blocks, image blocks, video galleries, contact forms. Everything was so easy to put together. And because their templates are designed by professional designers, if I just stayed within the bounds of what they suggested to me, I found that the website looked really clean and minimal, and my work did the talking.
Start your free trial today at squarespace.com and go to squarespace.com/Sean Tucker to get 10% off your first purchase.